Allahu Akbar. God is great. That is purportedly video from tonight in Tehran. Opposition protesters once again doing their call and response from the rooftops in the dark, signaling that the opposition movement, the uprising there, lives. Today, for the first time in 11 days, Iranians took to the streets again in large numbers to protest the results of the presidential election held last month, which they say was rigged to ensure the re-election of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. Defying warnings from the governor of Tehran that anyone attending today's demonstration would be met with a, quote, crushing response, thousands of people gathered across the city, chanting "Death to the dictator" and "God is great," and according to reports at one protest, also chanting "Police protect us." To a large extent, the protesters were met with police batons and tear gas. Reporters are still forbidden to cover the protests, but once again, we're counting on the people. We're counting on witnesses and participants to somehow get out word and to get out images of what's happening in their country. And the best we can do is pass that on to you with our best assessment from here of the authenticity and context of these admittedly pretty incredible scenes. Joining us now is NBC's chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel. Richard, it's good to see you tonight. Thanks for coming in.
It's a real pleasure.
How important is it that people turned out by the thousands today in spite of these big, well-publicized, overt threats that they'd be crushed if they did?
It's a sign of a new tactic. And a lot of people thought that the opposition movement, the street protests, part of it was over. And for a while, it looked like it was over. 11 days, the streets of Tehran were fairly quiet. Today, we saw them organized. They managed to communicate, and this was organized over the last several days over the internet and cell phones and text messages in Tehran. They came out in relatively small numbers, maybe 2,000 to 3,000, according to a variety of reports, and it only lasted a few hours, but it was they were able to show that the street movement is still alive. And this is the kind of hit-and-run tactic I think you're going to see them doing. Every once in a while, they'll gather steam, they'll go out, they know they're going to take some licks and confront violence, but then retreat just so that they can keep this part of the movement alive.
Well, Iranian-American observers have been telling us to sort of get used to a different type of pacing here, that this might be a year or more, that the fate of the opposition is not going to be decided in the short term. Does this tactic, as you describe it, does that imply to you that that's true? This is going to take a long time.
Absolutely. If they tried to go out with tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of people every single day and have people getting killed, as was the case in the early days of this opposition, it would die out quickly.
Yeah.
Now you have a hit-and-run strategy. Every once in a while you put your chips together, you cash them in, and then you retreat before there's any major losses. It's also difficult and probably impossible for them to do at this stage very large protests. Hundreds, if not several thousand people have been arrested. Many of them have simply disappeared, and there are widespread reports of mistreatment. So the people who'd be organizing this are off the streets.
How do you quantify, or can you quantify from outside, the relative value of essentially creating martyrs, both by people being killed and injured and also people being disappeared, put under house arrest, the relative value of that as a galvanizing force for the movement versus the intimidation factor that creates?
What I think they're trying to do is embarrass the regime. Not only externally, because generally the current Iranian government is already taking a serious black eye externally. So they're not trying to embarrass Iran anymore in front of the international community. You're not seeing so much the signs in English, "Obama help us," or "France intervene." Now it's about convincing the religious establishment that what the government is doing is wrong, and trying to exploit divisions that are within the government already. There are many senior clerics in Iran who believe in the theocracy, who believe in the system, but don't agree with the way that the government is handling it. These are people who live in Qom and in places, and they don't like what Iran has become. And if they can try and convince this community to act and to say this is not what we signed up for when we wanted a theocracy that would be inspired by divine law, not a military state that is intervening, crushing civilian protests.
So, in other words, watch the religious establishment to the extent that we can for signs of success.
Absolutely. They're not going to embarrass. They're not going to. It doesn't matter so much what France and Italy and the United States says at this stage. There'll probably be more moves to isolate Iran internationally through sanctions. I'm sure that's coming, but it's more about embarrassing the regime within and convincing senior people that what's happening is wrong.
Richard Engel, NBC News Chief Foreign Correspondent, it's always great to have your insight. Thanks for joining us.
It's a real pleasure.